Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Auerbach at Austin Animal Center. I want to start out today by saying that two of my heroes are in the room today, and they're two people that made all of this possible. One is Chief Animal Services Officer Tawny Hammond, who's been my boss for the last 4 and some years. Tawny, can you wave? Tawny, in all the time I've worked for her, has never encouraged me to kill any dog for behavior. I've worked under her in an operations manager capacity, and she's done nothing but help me, encourage me to save lives, and that's really extraordinary for an animal shelter director, considering we've dealt with some really hard cases. And she also is, when I got back into animal welfare, I remember I had worked in a shelter where I had to kill a lot of animals, and when I went to work for her, she said to me, you don't have to end lives anymore, you can just work to save them. And she has definitely proven that to be true. And I also want to mention Mike Caviani, who's the Director of Lifesaving at Austin Animal Center, who is my day-to-day partner in lifesaving. And without the work of him and his team, and of course Dr. Jefferson, none of this would also be possible either. So thank you both for coming. So we're talking about a heavy subject today. This is the first time this has been presented, and this is all still in a pilot phase, but we feel like it's a very important subject, and it's one that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's what happens when we have a dog that's truly at risk to be killed for behavioral reasons. What happens then? Because in the vast majority of shelters across the United States, the answer is nothing. They get put on a list and they die. So this presentation is about that moment when it seems that hope is lost and we're out of options and we have nothing in front of us but a euthanasia list. In this presentation, I'm going to use the terms euthanasia and killing interchangeably. Whenever I say euthanasia in this capacity, I don't mean true euthanasia. I should do this every time I say it. I am going to use them interchangeably, though. And it's another thing that in the longer version of this presentation we'll talk more about in depth. That's Kai. He's one of the dogs that we'll talk about today. Every dog you're going to see here was one of those dogs who hope was lost. Every dog in this presentation, we had no hope of saving it. Okay, so in 2015, we started piloting a procedure to help us make behavioral euthanasia decisions. And we wanted to create a standardized, rigorous process that would afford something like a Bill of Rights for dogs who are at risk of euthanasia. And the challenge was to save more of these dogs that were truly on death row and to find other outcomes. And we knew we had to focus, of course, on the safety of people and animals in doing so. So that we've now have a 1 year of this pilot study behind us. And this presentation is about what got us there and what's happened since we've done the study. In February of 2011, the City Council passed the no-kill implementation plan. And this put in a number of protective measures to save animals. And it included guidelines for euthanasia. One of this was a 24-hour kill list hold. That meant that before we killed any animal, we had to plea it to rescue or alert rescue 24 hours before it died, with some exceptions. And we also had a policy called call before killing. This meant that if you surrendered a dog and we were going to euthanize it, we had to you could opt in to know if that dog was going to be, or that dog or cat was going to be euthanized. So at the time you surrendered, we would ask you, do you want to call before we kill your animal? And you could say yes, and if so, we would call you and give you the opportunity to take that animal back. And it put limits on euthanasia for behavioral reasons. It said that there had to be a serious aggression issue or the animal had to pose a health and safety risk, regardless of where and under whose care it was housed. And we committed fully to transparency and data sharing. So put in some basic protections for animals. And this no-kill plan also said we had to save 90% or more of the animals in our care. But it had its limits. And it didn't save all the animals, although it's done an extraordinary job to keep Austin above 90% for the last 5 years. Here's some of the problems. There were really few basic protections for dogs, especially those at risk, and all decisions about euthanasia were left in the hands of someone called a behaviorist. That wasn't really ever defined. It was just a staff role. There were no checks and balances, and management didn't have to be involved in euthanasia decisions, didn't have to sign off. And it never addressed the possibility that rehabilitative efforts could save some of these dogs. This is a really big chart. It has a lot of writing on it, but the behaviorist who was working at the shelter at the time came up with this, and it identified a number of risk factors. And these risk factors could be used in isolation or in combination to determine what dogs would be killed for behavior. Some of the things that dogs could be killed for were things like separation anxiety, jumpy and mouthy behavior, ripping of pants legs, obsessive compulsive behavior, food or resource guarding. All of these were reasons that could be used to justify an animal being killed for behavior. There's even more. This is the aggression rating scale. If a dog was given an AG2 or AG3 rating, it would most certainly die for behavioral reasons. And the problem with this, anytime you make euthanasia decisions based on a chart like this, you're not considering individual circumstances. And individual circumstances really do matter. And so a lot of animals were never pled to rescue. Austin Pets Alive, who is our biggest rescue partner for saving animals from behavioral euthanasia, never even had the opportunity to take a lot of animals if they fit into these AG2 and AG3 ratings, and this was all done in the name of public safety. I'm going to ask one of our staff members, and we can do the video now. Can we do the video? I asked one of our staff members to come up today and speak really briefly about her experience prior to Chief Hammond becoming the director of the shelter. So we're first going to show you a video of a dog.
My name is Ashley Niels, and I have worked at the Austin Animal Center for about 3 years now. While we have been no-kill that entire time, since new management has taken over, it's really gone from, hey, we hit our 90% to we are truly striving towards no-kill. That was Colin, and he was killed the next day after I made that video. I talked to the behaviorist, wanted her to give him extra time, but because we were full at the time, what it took to get an animal killed didn't really take much. At the time, I was just animal care, and it didn't really matter what anyone thought except the one person. One person had control over life and death of all the animals in our shelter. Since then, I have moved on and actually got on the behavior team, and we've started this whole protocol where people get to advocate for the animals, and it's made all the difference. Colin would not be dead. Stitch and Chelsea would still be here. It truly matters. Each individual animal matters.
We decided to share that video and Ashley's story because Ashley's story exists in shelters all over the United States. And the thing that's really extraordinary about Ashley and so many of our other teammates is that they survived working in a shelter that while we were saving a lot of lives, they still were losing animals on a regular weekly basis in the name of behavior, animals that they knew should not die, animals that they wanted to save and had no power to. And so everything that we've done in the past year in this study is designed so that people like Ashley, who are working day to day with the animals in their care, have a voice and a role in life-saving, and that their voice and their opinion matters, and they have the power to save lives. So we had to change things. We had to get rid of that old protocol that said if you fall into X category, you are an AG3 and you're going to die in this organization regardless of the situation or the circumstances. So we implemented a new behavior rating system. We had no more assumed outcomes. Every dog is considered as an individual case. We look at all the circumstances. Every dog is treated as an individual, and there's different levels of managerial involvement involved in each risk level. So we still have risk levels. There's still serious things that happen. A dog that escapes and kills another dog that's free roaming, that's really serious to us. That's a true public safety issue. But we consider all the circumstances around that, and myself and Chief Hammond are directly involved in those riskiest cases. Dogs that are most critical are treated like critical medical cases. Their needs are addressed within 48 hours. They're not just sitting in kennels. We're treating them as critical cases, and we're putting our attention from the top down into saving their lives if possible. So 2015, things aren't bad. We have a 94% save rate. That's a great thing, but prior to Chief Hammond coming, dogs were still being euthanized for space if they had any problematic behaviors. So during space crises, the dogs in those BE2, AG1 categories, they were the first to go. It wasn't truly euthanizing, killing them for behavior, it was killing them for space. But we changed the policy, and we said no longer could dogs be killed for common behavioral challenges regardless of space. And each dog would be considered individually, but this created the need for us to create a new policy for how we were going to make life and death decisions. So we came up with a totally different protocol, and we believe it's the first of its kind. And it says that we're going to consider each animal as an individual, and we're going to make some commitments to the community, because life-saving really does start with the community. So following the new definition of no-kill, which says that 90% should never have been the end goal. 90% is just a great moment, but that we should keep striving to save all but animals that are irremediably physically suffering. We committed to our community to full transparency, telling them what animals were at risk, to accountability, the chief down being involved in those life and death decisions, to empower our volunteers and fosters and our staff to help save lives, no matter what, to engage with the volunteers and staff and fosters even when that gets really, really hard, which around life and death, many of you know it often does, and to collaborate with them, to work as true partners in life-saving instead of seeing volunteers, advocates, and fosters in opposition to the work we were doing. This is a really long statement, but this is our purpose statement, and this will all be available to you too. We'll get this attached as a supplemental document to the recording. But this was the purpose of this procedure, and it says that while dogs who pose a threat to public safety are not candidates for adoption, the Austin Animal Center also believes that the achievement of a no-kill community is consistent with public health and safety. This SOP is intended to address some of the shortfalls or gaps in the no-kill plan by laying out procedures to ensure all dogs being considered for killing because they're aggressive or pose a risk to public safety are guaranteed certain protections, and the decision to kill is not made by one person, but rather is a collaborative effort involving, at a minimum, 4 staff members to ensure the decision is the right one. So this is the before kill checklist. So this is dogs in Austin are still at risk. We aren't saving every dog. This is a kind of a long list, but in general, the dogs that are at risk are dogs that have had inflicted severe bites, dogs that have killed other dogs in the community, and dogs that are adjudicated to be dangerous or vicious and those ordered to be destroyed. Dogs are no longer at risk for failing or doing poorly on any kind of behavioral assessment. We don't do behavioral evaluations. They're not killed for common behavioral problems, and they're never killed because they're afraid. So we're going to walk through each of the rights guaranteed to the dogs in our care. Number 1, all dogs are held a minimum of 7 days prior to being killed. We pass this bifurcated stray hold, and it means that a dog can be placed immediately, but it can't be killed for 7 days. And the reason this is important is because let's say someday things go backwards and someone comes in who isn't as invested in life-saving. We actually have an ordinance on the books that just got passed that said while you can place an animal immediately, you can't kill it for 7 days. So even a director who's not as invested in life-saving as our current chief is, is going to have incentive to try to place the dog rather than kill it. A behavior and enrichment staff member is assigned as a case manager to every animal being considered for euthanasia, and this is something that Ashley does, as do any of our team members who want to be a part of that. This person has to confirm the incident notes. Many of us are still killing dogs based on notes from incidents, and we were a little bit horrified when we started to actually follow up and check into those to confirm them. We found that oftentimes, if there were 2 dogs and one dog was alleged of biting someone, we had the wrong dog identified. We weren't even dealing with the same animal. And so we were really startled to find out how inaccurate so many of the notes were. And also this idea of an unprovoked bite, how many of those unprovoked bites were really completely provoked. They were in a situation that the dog felt like it had to escape. We just had a recent one where a dog bit a 15-year-old boy on the arm, and it took us a couple of weeks to figure this out, but we finally figured out that the boy was intellectually disabled and had flailing body movements, and so it becomes much more and he was also talked about how he was trying to hug and hold the dog repeatedly. So when you think about that context, it really changes things, right? Multiple bites up an arm is really scary, but you can begin to understand that perhaps the situation, the dog felt really fearful and was trying to escape. That dog won't die. This person also talks to animal protection officers, police officers, anyone involved in the incident. They compare existing notes to interview statements, and they look for placement alternatives. Their job is the detective. They're trying to figure out what really happened, and then they're looking for alternative placements. Call before kill. I told you about this a little bit ago. It was where people could opt in before they surrender the dog. They can opt in to find out if that dog's going to be killed. It's no longer optional. We call them, and we tell them. And this seemed like a really hard decision to make, and there was well, what if people don't want to know? We do not owe it as a municipal agency to keep that from that animal's owner. We don't owe it to them. They're going to know if their dog is going to die, and we've saved a lot of dogs because at the same time they're calling them and telling them your dog is at risk, it's going to be killed in this shelter, we want to give you the opportunity to take it back. We're giving them a whole lot of resources and support with that offer. We're not just sending that dog back out there. We're saying, here's training support. How can we help you? Here's who you call if you need help. We consider foster placement. This isn't possible for every dog. There's some cases where there really are safety concerns, but we consider it, and we consider specialized foster placement. Maybe a dog can't go home with just anyone, but maybe it can go home with one of our training partners, and we can help support that. So I'll tell you a few stories about dogs we've saved this way. So I said we don't do behavior assessments. But when a dog is at risk, we often do a behavior assessment, and there's a reason why. We have one of our trusted training partners come in, and we do one of 2 things. We either do a play group assessment to see how the dog does with other dogs in a more normal environment, and or we do a more traditional behavior assessment, and that's because those notes, if that behavior assessment has a positive result, those notes can be used to plea that dog later to sanctuary or to an appropriate rescue. So we do some form of behavior assessment on dogs before they're killed. We make a rescue plea. We ask for help. So we have this Tawny and I came from Fairfax County Animal Shelter, and we never placed one behavioral dog to any rescue in some years ever. There was no lifeline. Many of you are probably in this situation, right? There's no lifeline outside of you. Here in Austin, we have the extraordinary Austin Pets Alive, who takes hundreds and hundreds of our dogs who would be behaviorally at risk for euthanasia every year. And so they are our lifeline. We have a day back and forth relationship. Mike and I talk on the phone basically daily, talking back and forth about dogs, trying to figure out if they'd be best placed at Austin Pets Alive or Austin Animal Center. But we do let our rescue partners know and give them the opportunity to take the dog. We also issue a public alert. We don't always do this either. It depends. This dog had been allowed to free roam her entire life. That's Chula. She was free roaming, and she had high prey drive. So her notes came in, and it was like, killed chickens, killed geese, killed a cat. She had killed several animals in the community. She was a lovely, wonderful, affectionate dog. She did great in our playgroup evaluation and loved to play with other dogs her own size. We decided that we were not going to kill her, and so we put out a public plea. We were very honest. We didn't shirk anything. If you went to my social media talk, I said marketing's not adoption counseling. This is a little bit different. We really wanted to get the word out. This dog's at risk for behavior. Does someone want to save her? And she was adopted. I'll tell her story in a little bit. This is our behavior and enrichment team. We have a lot of people. Our feeling is the more people at the table, the better. When we created a staff euthanasia decision-making team, we sent out an email to our entire 125-member staff and said, if you want to be part of this team, here's the expectation, and you'll get to have a role in making these decisions. And we now have 48 members of our staff on this euthanasia decision-making team, and they all play a role. And each member will pick different dogs that they want to advocate for. So that's them meeting. They meet weekly to discuss cases. We're never in a hurry to kill a dog. We take our time. If we think we're going to have to kill a dog, there's no hurry. We meet weekly to discuss cases and to problem solve. We send this notification out. This is an example. I won't read it to you, but this is what the notification looks like when a dog is at risk. This goes out to the whole team. We want everybody to know, and we give them a minimum of 24 hours. And what we ask them to do is advocate in writing to save that dog, if that's what they want to do. And so some of the things that the staff advocates will do, they'll call to confirm notes. They'll tell us their experience with the dog. They'll review the notes and say, this seems strange, this doesn't quite fit. They'll contact Austin Pets Alive and have another conversation with them. We're all working together as a team up until that last minute to try to save that dog. Okay, when we tell people we do this, they're like, you're crazy. You tell the volunteers when you're going to euthanize a dog before and give them the opportunity to save it. This was a really scary change because volunteer staff relationships in animal shelters are notoriously contested. They're hard, they're challenging. But we made this commitment, and what we said is that volunteers trying to save animals, even if they're sort of fighting with us animal by animal, even if they're saying, you can't kill this animal and we want to save it, that's a good thing. Because that spirit, that fight, that tension, that saves lives. That's not something we should be shying away from and running away from, because we can't, maybe this dog who we sent this notification on, we won't be able to save, but our volunteers trust us so much more because they know that we're going to tell them and be upfront with them, and they are going to have the opportunity to at least advocate. This is one of our volunteer advocates. These dogs have no one. They don't have owners. They don't have anyone standing up for them. And Tawny and I are too busy to go spend the time to go sit back in their kennels and get to know them and try to figure this out. Sometimes the only thing standing between life and death for one of these dogs is that volunteer advocate. And so we let them do their jobs. Do I have any of our volunteer advocates at AAC in the room right now? You guys are awesome. Thank you. You're awesome. Because you know what? What we say to them is you don't just get to say don't kill it. You have to tell us how to save it. We empower them to tell us how to save the dogs, and they do that every day. They find sanctuary placement. They raise thousands of dollars. They go back. They read notes. They find alternative placement. They find foster. They're constantly working to save lives, and we let them do it, and we don't tell them no. That's David. I wish he was here. He was really awesome. Okay. I couldn't figure out a picture to go with this. I really struggled. The dogs all receive a medical evaluation. Why? Because we know that some aggression is caused by physical symptoms. Who here heard about Neville? Neville, the dog, he's this little cute dog at Austin Pets Alive, and this little kid ran up and went like this to him, and Neville bit him right on the cheek. And Neville was ordered to be killed, and Dr. Jefferson and the Austin Pets Alive team and their amazing advocates fought to save his life and won. It turned out, we found out much later, that Neville, even though he was a young dog, had early onset hip dysplasia and was in a lot of pain. So when that child grabbed him, it physically hurt him. So we do a medical evaluation to make sure that there's nothing causing pain that would cause the dog to act aggressively. Here's our before kill form. And we'll make this available to you too. This is a sample one. This is a dog actually that did die. The form has to be completely filled out before a dog can be killed. It has to be signed off by myself or by the other deputy or the chief before the dog can be killed. One of us walks back and looks at every dog before it's killed. Also has to be signed off by a manager, an administrator, and whoever completed the form. And they have to go down each of these check boxes. They have to list the date. All these actions I just told you about, they're listed right here. They have to say the date, and then they have to enter any notes. And then all that dog's notes have to be attached. So every dog that is killed has a case file that is all kept in a binder because we track the information about those dogs so that we can learn what kind of dogs are still most at risk. You know what's most at risk in our community? Free-roaming dogs that display territorial aggression. They leave their property or on their property, bite a person or another animal. That's what we've learned from tracking this data. So how does this play out in practice? I can tell you all of this, and it's really cool, but how does this actually play out on a day-to-day basis? I'm going to tell you a couple of the stories of some of the dogs whose lives have been saved by the protocol. That's Bonnie. She is an 8-year-old dog, lived in a backyard with her son her whole life. A storm happened, and she and her son escaped, and they attacked a small dog. Well, they were both on the euthanasia list. We went and read the notes, and it turned out that in the notes, when you read them in detail, it said it was her son that killed the small dog. So we called the owner, and we said, is this true? It says that her son was named Luke. Is Luke the one that killed the small dog? And she said, no, Luke would never kill a small dog. That was Bonnie. Our notes were wrong. We had the dogs mixed up. She said, no, that was Bonnie that killed the small dog. And we said, well, has Bonnie ever shown any other aggression to small animals? Well, no. One time a cat came in the yard and she bit it. But no. Well, Bonnie was still at risk because dogs that escape and display territorial aggression are still at risk of being killed. So we had to figure out what to do with her. She was on the youth list, and volunteer advocate Brunie stepped up and advocated for her and said, this dog is wonderful. She's lived outside her whole life. She's heartworm positive. She's in terrible shape. And so what we agreed to do as a team is make her available as a special adoption. What that means is that we decided to adopt her out from our organization, but that adopter had to meet with one of the behavior enrichment team members and receive special counseling and access to resources and support. So that's Bonnie, adopted. And this is what her mom said. I went by the shelter a few times within the past 2 months to look at pups, but never found the one that could fit my lifestyle. After browsing through the kennels one last time, we came across Bonnie. Her sad, sweet face melted our hearts, not to mention how she was already house-trained, and her low temperament was the complete package. We were skeptical at first because of her history, but we knew as a senior she needed a better life, and without a doubt, I made the best decision not only for her, but for me. This is a person who we told everything to. We told her the whole story, and she still elected to take that dog home. She wanted Bonnie. Of the 300 dogs in our shelter, Bonnie was not unadoptable. Bonnie was the one that she chose. And there they are together. She says, I went into the shelter with the idea of getting a puppy. However, I came out with a senior, and it may have been the best decision I've made since moving to Austin a little over a year ago. And they're really happy, and Bonnie's doing wonderfully. And we're following Bonnie. So it's not enough for us to save these dogs. We're at a 98% save rate in Austin right now. The dogs that we're saving that we weren't saving before, we're saving them, but then we're following them over a year. We want to know what happens to them. Do they reoffend? Can we do this and have these dogs have long-term good, positive outcomes? We want to know all that information. Right now, after a year of piloting this study, we've saved 30% of the death row dogs. 30%. Mm-hmm. Yep, we call. We also, half these dogs now have their own Facebook pages, so. This is just what, I won't read this, but this is what Brunie said about her role as an advocate and how she appreciates having the opportunity to fight for dogs. She knew Bonnie had had a hard life. She wanted to advocate, and she says, management made a point to meet Bonnie to see for themselves why she was worth giving a chance to, and as a team, they decided to allow Bonnie to be adopted, and we're glad that we did. Okay, this is Goowa. I'm going to let Ashley come up and tell Goowa's story because Ashley is one of the key people that saved this dog's life.
So short backstory, Goowa is actually part of a court case. He was used as a deadly weapon, I guess. His owner had trained him to attack and used him against somebody. But at the time, luckily, the judge decided that he shouldn't be killed, but they wanted Austin Animal Center to decide what to do with him. Because of that history and because we didn't know what his attack command was, we didn't think he could be safely placed into the public, but he was actually a very sweet dog. Because he was evidence, he was actually in a kennel for 3 months with no interaction, couldn't go out, any of that, and he was still super sweet. So I actually advocated for him when he became at risk because he showed such resiliency, we had to give him a chance. So we had a volunteer actually found a sanctuary up in northern New York, and we were able to raise money to get him there. Half came from our nonprofit, and the other half we raised through social media and stuff. And we flew him up. We had to get him a special crate. We flew him up to Newark and then drove him an extra six hours up to this sanctuary in New York. I got to take him, and we put him on a long line and walked around the whole thing. He saw horses for the first time in his life. It was incredible to see this dog because he was a good dog, and he deserved to be loved and he deserved to live, and we were able to give that to him.
There he is at the sanctuary.
That's him up front. He, after a few months, he integrates the dogs into his whole pack, and Goober, he got treated for heartworm, and now he's running around playing with everybody.
Goowa was a dog that truly seemed, yes, thank you. Goowa was a dog who seemed beyond hope. He had been trained to attack, and he's a good example of that. We do have a responsibility to public safety, whatever that means. We know in our role as a municipal shelter and as animal welfare professionals, we do have a responsibility, and he had done something serious. He had been sicked on a person. He had bitten their hand only, but it was serious enough that we didn't want to place him in the public, but we found an option, and we didn't do that. Our staff advocates and our volunteer advocates worked together to do it, and then they raised it was $6,000 that was raised in 3 days or something. People want to help save these dogs. We were not alone in this. We just let people help, and now Goowa is living the good life at a sanctuary where the community is safe, and he's safe, and he's having a great life. Okay, next dog, Smokey. So Smokey came to us. We have some free roaming dogs here in Austin. He had lived outdoors his whole life, had been free roaming, ran up and bit a 13-year-old child. And he was another dog that really we didn't have options for. And he was on our youth list when volunteers decided to step up and fight for him. And they let us know that he had been kept as a guard dog his whole life. He was a young dog. He had very limited interactions with people. And so volunteers ask us for time. And this is something that for whatever reason, people who run animal shelters, probably because many of us who save a lot of lives are at capacity all the time, when people ask us for time, it's no, we have no time. We have to move quickly. It's one of the hardest things for us to give, but we do. We gave them 2 to 3 weeks to try to find placement for him. They worked with a national organization and who helps find rescue placement around the nation. And they eventually found a rescue placement that our rescue coordinator approved that had experience dealing with dogs with behavioral challenges. And a volunteer put him in the car and drove him up to California. He was very friendly with people. He was just fearful. This is part of the team that advocated for this dog. This is some of the people who said this dog doesn't deserve to die. And most of these dogs, remember, are still just dying silently. You're not hearing about them because nobody's talking about them. They go on that youth list and they die. For us, they go on that youth list, and that's really the beginning. That's where we start to say, how can we save this dog's life? Because we move quickly, we really pay the most attention to these dogs because, after all, our greatest responsibility is making these hardest of decisions. There's Smokey with his rescue. They're very happy that he arrived. Here's what the rescue says. His intellectual and behavioral growth is pretty impressive. He's calmed down quite a bit. He's not nearly as fearful. He's like a puppy exploring. Smokey jumps into the water spray and frolics until the backyard is muddy. His water-loving side is showing itself. He's doing great in his new life, and we here in California love him. He's a dog that's living. He's with a rescue group. They're going to take all the time they need to find him a permanent placement. He's a dog that deserves to be alive and deserves a second chance, and got it because of the volunteer and staff advocacy. This is the story that's probably closest to my heart. That's T-Bone. T-Bone came into us from a tragedy. When Chief Hammond first started, he was brought in because his owner's wife and daughter died of a crippling disease, a tragic disease, and the gentleman lost everything, and he lost his home and couldn't keep T-Bone. And so T-Bone came to us, and Dr. Jefferson and Chief Hammond decided they really wanted to help this dog get out alive. He was very barrier reactive. He was very hard to handle. He had unpredictable aggression towards people. Mike Caviani and I and our team, we worked back and forth with this dog for literally months on end trying to save his life, trying to get him out. Dr. Jefferson went as far as to try to raise funds to help the previous owner get a place to live where he could take T-Bone back, because she said T-Bone lived in a home. We knew he had lived in a home with small dogs, cats, and children and done fine. But he was just a mess at the shelter, and he really couldn't be safely handled. We had a staff person open the door to give him a treat, and he lunged out and bit her on the hand. He really couldn't be safely handled in the shelter. I believed hope was lost for this dog. I didn't think we could save this dog, and I didn't think he could be safely placed. I really believed that euthanasia was the right thing to do. But luckily, we had APA, we had volunteers, and we had staff advocating for him, saying, this dog deserves to get out of here alive. And they started looking for solutions. And the solution we found for him was that we said we don't feel safe sending him to just any old foster. But we found a trainer in the community who had a soft spot for dogs with behavioral challenges. He came to meet T-Bone. Mike helped him meet T-Bone. And he said, yeah, I'll take him home. I want to try it out. So he did. This is T-Bone at home with the trainer, and this is him with some of the trainers, the other dogs he was working with. That's him with one of his volunteer advocates. Our volunteers are so committed that they visited T-Bone at the trainer's house just to go hang out with him and see how he was doing. And slowly, over a few months, T-Bone, I should have mentioned he had major stranger danger. He started to overcome all of that and grow confidence. And now T-Bone is at home, and he's loving life with his dad in a wonderful home, and he lives with a little, a tiny little dog who's his best friend, who lays right here on his stomach. So they lay curled up all day. T-Bone, who I believed should not be alive, I did not believe could be safely placed, had the opportunity to go be rehabilitated, go live in a home, and now he's a wonderful family pet. And the funniest thing about him is his favorite thing to do is to go to the local pet store and meet new people. Here's a couple of the other dogs that were saved through the process. That's Cocoa Puff. She was saved by no confirmation. The incident notes didn't really match what actually happened. There's Indigo. Indigo was saved by another trainer volunteer who took her home and did rehabilitation. She's now in a permanent home. That's Nala. Nala is a dog that we decided after much conversation to adopt out as a special adoption. And this family is so in love with her. They took her home to be their farm dog, and now she rides on tractors with them and goes everywhere. And that little girl is her best friend. And Kai was a dog who came to us with a broken neck as a 3-month-old puppy. He grew up in the shelter because his neck injury was so severe that he was basically stuck in the shelter. He was like leash walks only for how long? 8 months? Yeah, 8 months, leash walks only. By the time he got off leash walks, he was just crazed. The leash biting, jumpy, mouthy stuff that you just can't handle them. We put him in a play group. Finally, he did awesome. And through the advocacy of a couple of our amazing volunteers, one of who is sitting there, he got adopted into a permanent home and is now loving life. But he was at risk not because of any incidents, but because his shelter behavior was just so uncontrollable. All he needed, though, was to get out. Like 99.999% of our dogs, all he needed was to just get out of the shelter, not to be killed. Opal came into us as a deemed dangerous dog. Dogs can be deemed dangerous. She actually hadn't really done anything. She had run out and nipped a person, something pretty non-serious. She was a puppy. She was a feral puppy. She is alive. A lot of dogs are still killed because they're legally deemed dangerous, regardless of what that means. It's very hard for us who work in shelters to place those dogs just because of that designation. She's alive, happy, and doing great in a home now. So there's all this fear about doing this stuff. There's a fear that it's just going to be all-out war between volunteers and staff, and this is just sort of an example of, this is the general experience of our volunteers. They tell us things that they feel fortunate to work at a shelter where their ability to save animals extends out to the animals that are on kill lists. They like to take a part in that. They feel like their role is so important. This is Sarah. She says, the chance I'm given to help a dog find its way back from death to a second chance wraps everything I do as a shelter volunteer in deeper meaning. Instead of causing strife between volunteers and staff, being truly collaborative and transparent about life and death decisions actually increases and builds trust. There's Ashley. I didn't know I was going to get her here today. So you've already heard from her, but Ashley is one of many staff who feel happier. They feel more fulfilled because they get to take a part in life-saving. They feel like their role has a deeper meaning. Ashley says, nowadays, the simple fact that each individual dog is treated like they matter and we get a chance to advocate for that dog makes all the difference in the world. We still can't save them all, but our save rates have skyrocketed and we no longer kill dogs just for being naughty. Most importantly, they're all given the dignity and respect they deserve. Okay. So how do you do this in your community? It's really not that hard. You need to know in your community, you need to evaluate what's currently happening. You need to know the number of dogs being killed for behavior or aggression. You need to know the percentage of total dogs being killed for behavior or aggression, because that'll tell you kind of the threshold in your community. So if your shelter's killing 30% in the name of behavior, that's a different problem than if they're killing 5% in the name of behavior. You need to know the reasons given for euthanasia. How many of you have seen those youth lists? The reason's 2 words usually. It'll say things like feral, unsocialized. In the next presentation, I'm going to talk a lot more about that. Fearful, unable to handle was the big one. In Fairfax, when Tani and I got there, the big reason for euthanasia was unable to handle. What does that translate to you? They didn't get them out of the kennel. They never got them out of the kennel before they decided they were going to die. You need to know you need to see shelter software notes. You need to know the shelter's policy about who makes those euthanasia decisions and how. And you need to know how many animals are dying, the reasons they're dying, and the notes on each animal that's dying. Now, if this is 30% of the population, that's a lot of notes. If it's fewer dogs, it's easier. But you generally need to know what are the justifications being given for death. I did a webinar for Maddie's son recently about behavior and fostering, and we asked shelters, and we asked a large group of shelters, what behaviors may put a dog at risk of euthanasia in your shelter? We're really surprised by the answer. 53% said fear-based aggression. 53% said fearful dogs. That's the dogs that are in the back of their kennel cowering, maybe snap at you, look terrified, pancaking. 53% still at risk of euthanasia for fear, for being afraid. 32% kennel stress, 30% barrier reactivity, 42% said resource guarding would put a dog at risk of death, 24% said dog selective, 73% of respondents said that any bite history at all would put a dog at risk of death. And then the other category, strong prey drive, 25%. So all of these things are still putting dogs at risk in most shelters. You can certainly expect that in your community, unless you're saving above 95%, dogs are still being killed for common behavioral challenges, including fearful behavior. Dogs are still being killed for being scared. They're being killed sometimes for in-kennel evaluations, for failing standardized behavioral evaluations, and then for any skin break or bite, regardless of severity. In the vast, vast, vast majority of organizations, dogs are still dying. And in many of your organizations, this is probably still true, even though you're doing great work. The goal of this protocol is to reduce the number of arbitrary reasons dogs are killed in the name of behavior and aggression, and to apply a consistent, rigorous process to each and every decision. Why don't we have these? We have SOPs for, like, cleaning cat bowls. We have SOPs for uniforms, for attendance. Why don't we have standard operating procedures in our shelters around this? This is the most important thing we do, and we owe it to our animals to develop these sooner than later. This is something we should all be doing now. So, to implement this, you can follow the steps, and this presentation is being taped today, so it will be available through Maddie's fund. You need to empower volunteers and staff to start saving lives and stop being afraid of that. Think of every person in your community, in your organization, as a collaborative partner in life-saving, not as someone in opposition to you. Think outside the box. Be persistent. Don't give up. That's the lesson of T-Bone. It took us 8 months, but boy, I'm glad that dog is alive. Treat every animal as if it is your own pet. That is what we owe our animals now. Treat everyone as if it's your own. How would you want it to be treated? And communicate often and honestly with your stakeholders, even when that's hard. That's a dog that's no longer with us. She passed over the Rainbow Bridge recently. But because of Brunie, who took that dog home, she spent the last 9 months of her life in a home, being loved, being surrounded by people who love her. If you only remember one thing from this talk today, it's that when it comes to making these life and death decisions, we're at this point in animal welfare where it's no longer okay just to say, there's a lot of dogs and the ones with behavior gotta go. It's no longer okay just to say, it's hard staring me in the kennel, or it failed the SAFER test. That's no longer acceptable, because we know now when we put animals into a stressful kennel environment and we leave them there for 23 and a half hours a day, we should expect that they're going to show us fearful behavior. We should expect that they're going to be traumatized and afraid. And even those animals that have incidents and their history, we owe it to them to find out what really happened. We owe it to them to be detectives. And we owe it to every animal in our care the same amount of rigor, attention, and care that we would give to our own pets at home. That's what we owe the animals in our shelter, because they don't have owners and we're their only voices.